Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil for yet another engaging conversation.
Okay, let's unpack this. Just last month, we saw that critical European health service outage. Not an attack, right?
Right.
But a bottleneck in its cloud infrastructure. Infrastructure, ironically, managed from outside Europe.
Exactly. And that's not a one-off.
No, it feels like a stark reminder of this fundamental question for Europe. Who truly controls its digital destiny?
Mm.
So today, we're doing a deep dive into Europe's digital infrastructure, specifically hardware, data centers, and robotics. It's really a critical look at what it means for Europe to be, genuinely sovereign in this rapidly changing world.
Yep.
So the big question is, why are these three areas, data centers, hardware, robotics, why are they such a crucial test of Europe's sovereignty? And maybe more importantly, what does this actually mean for you, for the listener, and the digital services you rely on every single day?
Well, what's really fascinating here, and I think often overlooked, is that hardware and infrastructure, they aren't just sort of technical bits and pieces. They are the physical backbone of digital power.
Yeah.
Full stop.
The physical backbone. Okay.
Yeah. Without direct, solid control over things like, the servers where your data actually sits, the cloud services running our apps, the network components linking us all up, and then you have the really intricate supply chains for advanced robotics. Without that control, Europe's autonomy in the digital sphere, it just becomes incredibly fragile.
It's like you said before we started, trying to run a country where your roads and power grids are owned by someone else.
Precisely. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And then compounding this huge challenge is the energy demand. I mean, the sheer expansion needed for this digital infrastructure is incredibly energy hungry.
Right.
And it often collides head on with Europe's already strained power grids. So it's a double bind, really.
That analogy, the roads and grids, it really lands the dependency issue. But here's where it gets, really interesting for me. This isn't just about tech in isolation, is it? It's part of a much bigger picture for Europe.
Absolutely.
So where does this specific topic fit into that wider series of, let's call them systemic challenges Europe is grappling with right now?
Yeah, if you connect the dots here, Europe faces these systemic dependencies across so many critical areas. You've got finance, defense, obviously energy, those advanced semiconductors we hear so much about, even down to raw materials.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what we're discussing today, hardware, data centers, robotics, they actually act as critical threads linking all these vulnerabilities together.
How so? Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about it. Data centers, those massive server farms, they consume huge amounts of energy. Robotics, the automated workforce of the future, they're totally dependent on advanced chips.
Right, the chips again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And both of these sectors rely on these complex global supply chains that are, more often than not, controlled from entirely outside Europe. So it's not just, a single point of weakness.
Yeah.
It creates this multi-layered vulnerability. It really goes far beyond any single sector. It's like a whole web of reliance.
A web of reliance. Okay. So if everything's interconnected like that, where does that leave Europe's, its most foundational digital asset, the data centers themselves, who's actually in control there?
Well, the reality on the ground is quite stark. Europe's entire digital economy is, largely powered by what we call U.S. hyperscale cloud providers.
Oh, big names.
Yeah.
Amazon, Microsoft, Google.
Those are the ones. As of this year, 2025, they collectively command a staggering, 70% of the European cloud market, just three companies.
60%. And European providers.
Local European providers. They hold only about 15%. It's marginal.
Wow.
And this dominance, it leads directly to what some are calling a critical sovereignty paradox. Europe wants digital autonomy, but its digital heart effectively beats on foreign-owned infrastructure.
So that paradox, how does it play out legally? I'm thinking about data privacy, GDPR.
That's exactly where it bites. You take the U.S. Cloud Act, for example. It's a pretty controversial piece of American law that essentially allows U.S. authorities to demand data from American companies,
Right.
even if that data is physically stored in a data center right here in Frankfurt or Dublin or wherever.
So just because the server's in Europe doesn't mean my data is protected only by European law.
That's the crux of it. The physical location doesn't guarantee legal protection under EU law if the provider is American. And that creates this profound legal dilemma for European organizations, especially, as you say, around GDPR compliance.
That feels like a fundamental, a betrayal almost for EU citizens and businesses expecting EU protections. Is there any real way around that legal paradox currently? Or is that just the price of using those services?
For now, it's largely the reality we live with, and that's precisely why it's become such a focal point in this whole sovereignty debate. And look, the implications of this dominance, they aren't just theoretical or legal. They're hitting home physically in European cities. They're creating entirely new kinds of conflicts.
How so? Conflicts over what?
Well, the expansion of these massive data centers doesn't happen in a vacuum. It brings really significant pressure on local resources, land, water, and crucially electricity. Cities like Dublin, Amsterdam, Frankfurt, they're really the case studies here.
I've read about that, yeah.
Rapid data center growth has led to severe bottlenecks in resources, and even government-imposed moratoria, basically, temporary bans on any new data center development. They're literally running out of space and power in some areas.
A critical sovereignty paradox and these local resource conflicts, that sounds like a really tough spot. You mentioned energy earlier, that collision course with strained grids. How deeply does that energy piece really cut into Europe's digital ambitions?
Oh, it's one of the biggest challenges, maybe the biggest, honestly.
Yeah.
Just think about our daily digital habits. Social media, streaming videos, online shopping, all the cloud workloads businesses run, and now especially the emerging AI workloads.
AI, right. That needs a lot of power.
A huge amount. All of this is driving an exponential increase in electricity demand.
Yeah.
Data centers already consume several percent of entire national grids in some places.
Several percent? Like how much?
Well, take Dublin.
Okay.
In 2023, data centers there consumed nearly 80%, 87 of the local electricity supply.
80%. In Dublin. That's staggering.
It is. And in places like Amsterdam, London, Frankfurt, it was somewhere between 33% and 42%, significant chunks of the grid.
At what point do cities just say, stop? If Dublin's at 80%, surely they can't build much more. What happens then to Europe's digital growth?
That's precisely the tension. And AI workloads, they're just going to add even more pressure. Total data center consumption across Europe is projected to jump from around 96 terawatt hours in 2024 to an estimated 236 terawatt hours by 2035.
Wow. How does that compare to other demands?
Get this. The projected growth in energy demand just from data centers is actually larger than the entire expected energy demand growth from all the electric vehicles on the continent combined.
Larger than EVs. That really puts it in perspective.
It does. It highlights the immense strain. Europe's already, let's face it, fragile energy system makes achieving genuine digital sovereignty doubly difficult. Your digital ambitions are directly clashing with very real physical energy limitations.
And it's not just electricity, is it? You mentioned water earlier.
Exactly. It's not just about plugging things in. This digital hunger also creates another critical challenge: water scarcity. This is especially true in regions already affected by drought. AI tools alone, just for cooling the data centers they run in, could require billions of cubic meters of water annually by 2027.
Billions?
Yeah, creating direct competition for precious resources like drinking water and agriculture.
So it's a thirst for power and water. Okay, that really drives home the physical constraints. So let's move from the data and the cloud to the physical backbone itself. What about the actual hardware? The servers, the network cables, the chips inside everything. Are Europe's physical building blocks facing similar kinds of vulnerabilities?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
The servers, the networking gear, routers, switches, many of the critical components that make up these data centers and our communication networks, they're largely imported.
Dominated by who?
Well, the data center server market is dominated by global players, mostly American, like Dell Technologies, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, Cisco Systems. Similarly, key networking components like those system-on-chips, basically tiny computers on a single piece of silicon, and the controllers, they're mostly produced by non-EU firms. Think Broadcom, Qualcomm, Intel.
So Europe doesn't really make its own core digital hardware.
It lacks end-to-end control. From the initial design through to manufacturing for many of these essential physical components. And what's really, fascinating, I suppose, is Europe's paradoxical position when it comes to semiconductors. The chips.
Paradoxical how?
Well, Europe actually holds market-leading positions in making the very specialized equipment used to manufacture chips. We have a trade surplus there, about $26.4 billion in 2023.
So we make the tools.
We make some of the best tools. But we face a profound dependence on imports for the final finished chips themselves. We have a $19.6 billion trade deficit there. It's like, as you said, owning the best tools to build cars, but still buying almost all your cars from overseas.
That's quite the gap. Where are the chips coming from then?
Almost 80% of the semiconductor suppliers for European companies are headquartered outside the EU. Taiwan, Malaysia, China, these represent strategic choke points in the supply chain. Any disruption there causes major problems here.
Choke points. That sounds, well, precarious. Especially given geopolitics. How vulnerable does that actually make Europe?
It makes Europe incredibly vulnerable. And even major policy responses like the EU Chips Act, which had really ambitious goals, well, it's being questioned. The European Court of Auditors, they concluded it's very unlikely to actually meet its targets.
Why not?
Mainly due to fragmented authority and funding across member states. It really validates this idea that you can't build a truly unified digital future with sort of fragmented national pockets of ambition. It's like trying to build a superhighway where each town only paves its own street. It just doesn't connect properly.
A superhighway built in patches. Okay, so the chips are a problem. What about the networks connecting everything?
All right, beyond the hardware and the data centers, the networks themselves are also highly vulnerable. Now, the EU has near universal 5G household coverage. It's about 94.3% in late 2024, which sounds great.
Sounds very good.
But the underlying security is undermined by, again, fragmented implementation of the EU's own 5G toolbox, the security guidelines. Only 10 out of 27 member states have actually put effective limits on high-risk vendors like Huawei and ZTE.
Only 10. So the majority haven't fully implemented the security measures.
Correct, which creates this clear sovereignty deficit right in the network layer.
Yeah.
And that deficit will likely just roll over into the forthcoming 6G networks, continuing to leave doors open to potential interference or dependency.
And what about the really big pipes, the cables under the sea?
The subsea communication cables. Absolutely critical. They carry something like 99% of all intercontinental internet traffic.
99%.
Yeah. And this critical infrastructure, it's largely privately owned, often by consortia that include non-European telecoms companies and those same U.S. hyperscalers we talked about.
So foreign ownership or co-ownership there, too?
Yes.
Yeah.
For example, China Mobile co-owns the India-Europe Express cable, the IEX. Now, the EU does have an action plan. There is some funding, but these often feel like reactive measures, trying to secure infrastructure where Europe has limited direct control to begin with.
Reactive rather than proactive. Okay. So we've covered data centers, energy, hardware, networks, chips, cables, quite a list of dependencies. How do robotics then, the sort of automated workforce of the future, how do they fit into this sovereignty discussion? They're often touted as key to Europe's future industrial competitiveness.
They are key.
Yeah.
And Europe is indeed a top adopter of robotics. The industrial robot market here is projected to reach, over US $18 billion by 2032. Germany, Italy, France, they lead the way. Germany alone installed 37% of all new robots in the EU back in 2022.
So lots of robots being used in European factories.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The overwhelming majority of these industrial robots are actually manufactured outside Europe, mainly in the United States and Asia, particularly China and Japan.
So we're buying them, not building them mostly.
That's the core issue. It's a classic case of creating vibrant internal demand that is then overwhelmingly satisfied by your geopolitical competitors.
And the implication of that?
Well, this dependency risks ceding control over future industrial competitiveness. It's about who owns the intellectual property, who sets the standards, who develops the next generation of automation. If Europe doesn't build these, brains and bodies of industry, it risks becoming a permanent rule taker in this next industrial revolution.
And losing out on the high-value jobs that go with designing and building them.
Precisely. Ceding both innovation and high-value job creation. And we have to remember, labor markets will inevitably shift as robots become more capable. We need to think carefully about who benefits most from those shifts.
And robots presumably use energy, too, adding to that strain we discussed.
They certainly do. From assembly lines running 24/7 to just charging humanoid robots, it all adds to the power burden. A single industrial robot can use anywhere between 1 and 30 kilowatt hours per hour. That adds up quickly across thousands of factories.
But is there another side to that coin? Could robots help with energy?
Yes, actually. That's what's quite interesting here. Robotics also offer this kind of dual-use proposition for energy. While they consume power, they can also be instruments of much greater energy efficiency in manufacturing.
How?
Through precision, optimizing processes, reducing waste. New technologies and really strategic use of robotics can significantly cut power usage and even improve energy quality at the factory level. And the EU is planning an EU-wide robotics strategy in 2025 to try and harmonize efforts, which could be a really crucial step forward.
Okay, so a potential solution there, or at least a mitigation. We've laid out a pretty comprehensive picture of the dependencies, the energy constraints, the strategic vulnerabilities across data, hardware, robotics. It's quite sobering.
It is.
So given these deep-seated weaknesses, the obvious next question has to be, what are the proposed solutions? What kind of vision does someone like Mario Draghi offer, especially thinking about his August 2025 speech to try and fix these profound weaknesses?
Right. Draghi's vision, laid out in that speech, it's often described as a radical federalist blueprint.
Hmm.
It proposes several key, quite bold solutions to tackle exactly these issues.
Such as?
First, he talks about common borrowing EU-level debt, specifically to finance sovereign data centers, basically pooling resources to build and control Europe's own digital infrastructure from the ground up.
Common debt for data centers. Okay, that's big.
It is. Second, he advocates for joint procurement of secure hardware. So the EU acting as one buyer to ensure it gets reliable, trustworthy components, potentially driving down costs and setting standards too.
Makes sense. Buying power.
Exactly. And third, a centrally steered robotics industrial policy. This isn't just about buying robots, but actively developing the critical components, motors, sensors, AI software, safety standards domestically within Europe.
Building that capacity internally.
Yes. And crucially, underlining all of this is the need to integrate digital policy directly with Europe's energy planning. That link is vital.
Why is that integration so critical?
Because without that holistic approach, even the most ambitious digital sovereignty projects, like building huge new data centers, risk being completely unsustainable due to those power and resource limitations we discussed. You can't plan one without the other.
Draghi's vision sounds incredibly ambitious. You use the word radical. But isn't asking for more federal integration, especially common debt, isn't that just a huge political lift, given how protective member states usually are of their national sovereignty and budgets?
It absolutely is a huge political lift. You've hit the nail on the head. That's the core challenge. However, there was a potentially significant political shift back in March 2025, remember, when Germany reformed its national debt break rules, specifically allowing more borrowing for defense and strategic infrastructure.
Yes. That could make it easier for Berlin to accept common EU debt for things like this.
It could, potentially. It might signal a shift in thinking in a key member state. And look, there are precedents for joint action, even if smaller scale. The Euro-HPC joint undertaking, for example, that already procures supercomputers collectively for Europe. It shows that joint procurement can work effectively on a European scale.
So maybe not impossible. There's a glimmer of hope that the political will could be mustered. But, okay, beyond the high-level politics, what other practical obstacles stand in the way of these ambitious proposals? What are the hurdles on the ground?
Well, there are several significant hurdles. For instance, you have state aid asymmetries. Smaller member states often get nervous that these big, centrally funded projects will inevitably favor the economic giants, like Germany and France, potentially increasing internal competition rather than fostering cooperation.
Right. Fears of dominance.
Exactly. Then you have that strong local opposition to data center siting we talked about.
Yeah.
Very real concerns over land use, water consumption, electricity grids leading to those moratoria in places like Dublin and Amsterdam. That's not going away easily.
And robotics.
Robotics, while promising huge productivity gains, also spark legitimate labor fears about job displacement. That needs careful management and communication.
Understandable fears.
And fundamentally, you still have those deep-seated nationalist reflexes across Europe that just make deeper integration politically difficult. Remember that IDC survey from July 2025?
Remind me.
It showed that only 4% of European organizations actually plan to stop using the big global public cloud vendors to switch over to local European providers.
Only 4%? That's tiny. What is a signal?
It's a stark indicator, isn't it? It suggests the market, the actual users, still overwhelmingly prefer the scale, the features, the perceived innovation of the existing U.S. firms. Draghi's grand blueprint fundamentally collides with this fragmented political reality on one hand and market inertia and preference on the other.
That 4% number is really telling. It suggests this whole push for European digital sovereignty might be more of a top-down political ambition that isn't fully resonating with businesses on the ground yet. Why do you think that disconnect exists? Is it just convenience or cost or maybe a lack of truly viable European alternatives right now?
I suspect it's a combination of all three, really. Businesses, understandably, prioritize efficiency, cost-effectiveness, and access to the absolute latest innovation. The U.S. hyperscalers, they offer immense scale, very mature services, and often aggressive pricing that smaller local providers can struggle to match. Overcoming that inertia requires more than just political will. It needs truly compelling, competitive European alternatives that deliver equal or ideally greater value.
A huge challenge then. It really sounds like Europe is standing at a critical crossroads here. So, thinking about the future, what does all this mean? What are the possible scenarios, the big paths Europe could take from this point?
Looking ahead, there seem to be two primary paths emerging, two quite distinct futures for the continent.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first scenario, let's call it integrated EU infrastructure. This is the future where Draghi's vision or something like it succeeds. You have sovereign data centers, robust, secure European networks, and a strong homegrown robotics policy where Europe really controls the essential IP and manufacturing.
The optimistic scenario?
It is, but, and this is a huge but, this is only achievable if Europe also undertakes massive, coordinated upgrades to its energy infrastructure to actually match that rapid digital expansion. It undeniably requires that common debt we talked about and unified strategic regulation across the board.
Right.
The heavy lift.
Right. Needs the energy piece to work. And the alternative.
The alternative scenario is basically fragmented dependency. This is the path where things continue more or less as they are now. U.S. hyperscalers maintain their market dominance, advanced robotics continue to be largely imported, and Europe's talk of digital sovereignty remains mainly rhetoric without the underlying substance or real autonomy.
So still dependent.
Yes. This path would see Europe remain essentially a rule taker from external powers, like the U.S. and China, in the digital realm, constantly reacting to their technological and market moves rather than proactively shaping its own digital destiny.
Integrated infrastructure versus fragmented dependency, that lays it out clearly. So bringing it all together then, what's the bottom line here? For Europe navigating these critical digital crossroads, and maybe more personally for you, the listener, as a digital citizen and consumer?
The bottom line is this. Hardware, data centers, and robotics. They aren't just technical fields. They are the fundamental substrate, the very ground upon which sovereignty and self-determination are built in the 21st century.
The foundation.
Exactly. Draghi's proposals for federal integration, they are bold and arguably proportional to the scale of the crisis Europe faces. But as we've discussed, they're also incredibly energy-intensive and politically very, very difficult to achieve.
A massive undertaking.
Huge. So Europe really stands at a critical juncture. It has to decide, either commit to integrating federally, pool resources, and undertake those necessary extensive energy system upgrades to power its digital future, or continue down the current path of fragmentation, risking perpetual structural dependency on others for its core digital needs.
And that warning from the European Court of Auditors about the CHIPS Act.
That serves as a really potent reminder, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That fragmented national efforts, however well-intentioned, simply aren't enough in this kind of global geopolitical technology race. You need scale, unity, and central coordination.
So a final thought for our listeners to take away.
Yeah, perhaps as we wrap up this deep dive, just consider this. What kind of digital future are you willing to invest in? And I don't just mean financially, but politically, socially. What are you willing to support to ensure genuine autonomy for the continent and ultimately the security and control of your own digital life within it? It's a choice with profound consequences.
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.